Here we have also Ken Lysick and John Tapatis on the ERCOT Market Intelligence team here at Genscape, who will be presenting the 2014 Summer Outlook. So I guess we'd like to welcome you to the Outlook. We'll do our best to answer questions at the end of the presentation and also be sending out a copy of the presentation and recording to each attendee afterwards. So what we're going to go over today, the weather outlook, a pricing recap from the summer of 2013, a wind and generation outlook, ORDC and other rule changes, and we'll wrap it all up at the end.
Oh, I'm kind of.
You got it.
Okay, so this is the ENSO comparison, or El Nino Southern Oscillation, which assumes climatology and weather patterns are based off the water temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. Depending on if the temperatures in the area are below the norm or above the norm, can dramatically impact weather patterns all over the world. As far as this year is concerned, we're showing a tendency for weak El Nino during the summer months. So this first graph on the right here is the CFS forecast over time, where the blue lines are essentially the latest forecasts, and the red lines are the earlier forecasts. So the first, this graph is showing that the surface sea temperatures over the recent forecasts have been trending upwards. So essentially that indicates the weak El Nino, which would mean warmer than usual temperatures in the western half of Texas, away from the major load zones. The top center graph here, you can see the precipitation expected for summer is a lot lower than normal across western Texas, given a weak El Nino. As well as in the far right graph, you can see that there are warmer temperature anomalies in the southwestern portion of Texas on these weak El Nino events. So again, with the ENSO comparison, the graphs on the right are taken over the previous 3 months in their 3-week periods of the water temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. And what these are essentially showing is that the water temperatures the warm water area has shifted eastward towards the Chilean, Peruvian coasts, as well as increased in elevation from further below sea to essentially just pretty much at the sea level, which pretty much indicates the weak El Nino effect. In these two graphs at the bottom, the summer 1997 is essentially a strong El Nino effect, where the summer 2009 is a weak El Nino. And you can see that during a weak El Nino, Texas is really the only area with a above normal heat potential. Okay, so this is the drought monitor across all of Texas. Right now, drought conditions exist in 91% of Texas, down from last year about 96% at this time. We do have exceptional drought in 2 particular areas, the Panhandle and western Texas along the Mexican border. Here's a look at drought comparison in the following summers. 2009, 2011, and 2012 all see a correlation between the strongest weather anomalies following drought conditions in the late summer to early spring area. 2013 is the only exception. As you can see, in 2009, the southeast portion of Texas is in extreme drought, and during the summer of 2009, you saw the warmest temperature anomalies in the same area. 2009 is also interesting, as that was a weak El Nino summer, similar to what we're expecting this year, and there's a good correlation between the drought-stricken area and the strongest above normal temperatures. Again, drought comparison. The drought conditions are expected to persist or intensify over the summer across central and northern Texas. The areas in yellow are not under drought conditions, but could become under drought over the course of the next couple months, which would increase the odds for warmer than seasonal August. This is a look at our rainfall risk. This is the percentage of normal precipitation over the past 6 springs. The graph on the bottom left is the spring that preceded the very hot summer of 2011. you can see that we had a very dry spring, particularly out in western and southern Texas, and that really helped to fuel the drought, and we saw very hot and dry conditions across Texas for most of that summer. The next graph up, the center left, 2012, you can see that we had a much wetter spring and did not have the same drought conditions or experienced the same extended periods of hotter than normal temperatures. So this year it really falls in between, with closer similarities to 2011, where we still had well below the percentage of normal precipitation across the majority of Texas, but more precipitation in the far west and southern regions than we had in 2011. This is the tropical summary. The graphs on the right are essentially for June, July, and August. And you can see that any prevailing hurricane tracks are more likely to be farther east in the Caribbean, as developing El Niños reduce the likelihood of hurricanes over the Atlantic Basin, which would essentially add to drier risks in the summer with potential for reduced precipitation in Texas. Now I'm going to talk about what we're forecasting for temperature anomalies for ERCOT this summer. We're anticipating a warmer than normal summer, particularly in the western and central regions. For the main load zones of Houston and Dallas, we're expecting more seasonal temps and precipitation. Based on the drought map from the first 5 months of this year, you can see that the west still has significant drought conditions. And for this summer, that's what we're expecting and where the warmer risks are likely to exist. So June will be more seasonal, with the developing El Nino not really taking shape until July and August. So we're expecting pretty much seasonal temperatures and precipitation. Historically speaking, I want to say we have about an average of 8 days with load peaks over 60 gigs, which is pretty much what we're expecting this year. July is anticipated to be warmer than normal by about 1 to 2 degrees, in the main load zones, and 2 to 3 degrees further west and south. Expecting more days above 60 gigs and a few days, with peak loads encroaching or surpassing 65 gigs, which is a lot different than what we saw in 2013. So August, temperatures should pretty much be above seasonal across all of ERCOT. Wider and more intense heat focused in the south and south central, with more than 9 days above 65 gigs. We're expecting to have a stronger load of, last year 67.2. We think that will be exceeded, but not as strong as the overall, peak load of 68.3 experienced on August 3rd of 11. Looking at historical peak temps and demand, San Antonio has the hottest weather days between August 6th and August 16th, with Dallas-Fort Worth between August 2nd and August 10th, and Houston between August 5th and August 12th. So historically speaking, we'll have our summer and annual peak demand likely to fall between August 6th and August 10th. Peak demand will be between Monday through Thursday, never on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. On average, Dallas has 18 days of 100-plus degree heat. High temperatures for the year. The current warm forecast indicates this number may be exceeded. And as far as tropical storms are concerned, we haven't seen a tropical storm during the summer months since 2008 with Hurricane Dolly and Tropical Storm Edward, and we're not expecting any tropical storms or hurricanes this year. So to wrap it up, ERCOT anticipates a summer peak of around 68.1 gigs, which is higher than last year's 67.2, but below the all-time high of 68.4 observed on August 3rd of 11. And this is due to the warmer weather anomalies existing further southwest of Dallas-Fort Worth than they were in 2011. However, the risk to exceed the all-time high is greater given the recent warmer forecast revisions, as well as the year-over-year demand growth. If similar conditions as those of August 3rd of 2011 were to take shape, ERCOT estimates the extreme load to be around 70.4 gigs, given the growth in demand year over year, though this is highly unlikely. The strongest above normal temps will be occurring in central and western Texas. And comparing the current forecast to summers 2011, 12, 13, 2011, 12, and 13, 2014 will likely rank between 11 and 13. certainly warmer than last summer, but not quite as high as in 2011. So Genscape's expecting summer peak to fall between 67.2 gigs and 68.4 gigs, with a greater potential toward the higher end of the range. Now I'm going to talk about pricing last year. So here's a look at June. You can see what we have megawatt hour, the price per megawatt on the left-hand axis, and we have megawatts of demand on the right-hand axis. You can see that June followed a pretty typical of day-to-day schedule, or I guess pricing events as we typically see, with positive DART spreads. Though they're not too wide, it wasn't really until we encroached the below 60 range did we start to see extremely high day-ahead clears in anticipation of not necessarily the fear premium, but just trying to make sure the real time didn't we didn't blow out more or less. So when demand was in the mid-50s, it seems day ahead was still $2 to $3 above the real time clears, and then as demand got above the 60, 61 gig range, did the day ahead price really open up. So looking at July, you can see demand was a lot more volatile, as was the day-ahead real-time spreads. In the July 7th to 13th time frame, you can kind of see the day-ahead price follows a day or two behind. The demand, the increases in demand, and for looking at July 11th with the highest day-ahead clear of the month, you can see that had a bearish effect on real-time prices. I think that's pretty much what we're expecting to see this July, with higher than on average closer to 60 gigawatt peak load days, more likely to have both more negative DART spreads throughout that month. And similar in August, we had extremely high day ahead clears the first week of August, which I'm expecting again this year, given that's roughly when our strongest peak load days will be, which would ultimately have a bearish impact on real-time prices. So I guess it's similar trends are expected for this year, with wider DART spreads the first week of August, and then as demand softens up over the last couple weeks relative to the first week, we're more likely to see negative DART spreads take shape. So these were the top 12 peak load days of 2013. You can see 10 of them occurred in August, which is similar to what we're expecting this year. The high temp, we have high temps across the board. We really, in order to have extremely high load, we do need 100+ degree heat across all the major load zones. You can see the strongest day last year, 67.2. We had pretty much 100-degree heat, 100+ degree temps, and the three of the biggest cities in Texas. The biggest change, I'd say, year over year is the price of gas. Henry Hub is trading about, I want to say, $4.55 when I looked earlier this week. So it's a good dollar stronger than last year. And the other notable thing is that the price gap was not reached at all last year, with the highest 5-minute price of $888. To wrap up, this year we actually have we're increasing the price cap to $7,000 per megawatt effective June 1st. Again, with the natural gas, Henry Hub's at least $1 stronger relative to where it was last year, and we also have the ORDC price adder being introduced June 1st, which we'll get into in a little bit. So now I'm going to hand it over to John Tapatis, who's going to talk about the wind outlook and generation.
Thanks, Brian. To start off, we're going to take a look at wind fundamentals. The summer wind fundamentals follow a particular certain pattern, in that wind generation is usually much more active in June relative to July and August. In fact, if you take a look at the graph on the top left, entitled ERCOT Wind Monthly Variability, you see a pretty steep move down as you move from June into July, and less of a step down as you go from July to August. In general, wind often follows a strong diurnal pattern, strongest in the morning and evening with that midday valley. The weather drivers here being that sea breeze in ERCOT South, as well as the low-level jet in ERCOT West. On an aggregate basis, wind generation in summer of 2013 was actually the highest of the past 4 years of summers, despite a capacity factor about 4.5% lower than that of 2011. If you take an average 29% capacity factor from the past 4 years, we're looking at something close to maybe 31 to 32% being pretty plausible to see for summer of 2014, which would be the equivalent of about 8 gigawatt hours for the entire summer, which would be the highest ever recorded. And this is using an installed capacity close to 11.5 gigs. In summary, looking at the wind here for the summer, following a pretty diurnal shape, June typically being the strongest month for the wind, followed by July and then August. Warmer than normal temperatures would be favorable for stronger winds, especially in that South Texas wind pocket. And an increase in total wind capacity obviously increases the probability of seeing much more output from wind generation following a favorable wind scenario. On to the exciting topic of generation. Typical maintenance outages for the summers based on a 3-year average of historic planned outages between June and September over the weekdays is around 371 megawatts. Forced outages during that same time frame on the weekdays for the summers is just under 2,500 megawatts. Looking at ERCOT's final seasonal assessment of resource adequacy, it looks like total resources are sitting just under 74 gigs, with peak demand, just eclipsing that 68 gig level. So looking like there is still some room to breathe there in terms of ERCOT being able to have sufficient generation relative to demand. As we take a look at new units, new generators that came online and are scheduled to come online year to date, you can see there's a variety of fuel types, obviously mostly gas and wind. I want to point your attention to 3 that we're going to be talking about in particular in just a couple of minutes. And that's the Ferguson replacement project by LCRA, as well as the Panda Sherman and Temple Phase 1 projects that are being done by Panda Energy. New wind that's coming online. Since the spring, March, April, May, we had 3 wind farms that were supposed to come online, nameplate capacity of about 880 megawatts. In the summertime, we've got 1+ gigs separated by 6 different wind farms that are supposed to come online between June, July, and August. On the thermal side, you've got some smaller expansions over at Channel, 260 megawatts in June. Deer Park, another 260 megawatts in June as well. And then you've got the Ferguson replacement, which is meant to replace that old Ferguson unit that was retired in September of 2013. A couple of different scheduled completion dates. The EIA has them in June, ERCOT has them in July. And then you've got Panda Sherman and Temple 1, about 800 megawatts each, showing a bit of discrepancy between those completion dates as well. EIA has June for both of those, whereas ERCOT has August for both of those. It's important to note that both of these Panda units are going to be quick start units in that they can reach 50% output in a half an hour. So you're really looking at about 2 gigs of new wind since the spring, followed by about 2,600 megs of new thermal generation that's supposed to come online during the summertime. We were able to do some overhead flights to take a look at construction progress over at Sherman on the left and Temple on the right. The Sherman Interconnect is going to be on the 138 kV system from Sherman into the Payne substation. On the Temple side, there's the Knob Creek substation, which is being built on site. And that Knob Creek substation is going to connect via 2 lines to Semple and Salado on the 345 system. As it comes to that TC Ferguson unit, like I said, this is a replacement for that original gas plant that was shut at the end of September. Using our infrared camera technology and monitor, we saw that on the 8th of April of this year is when we were able to adjust that camera and point it a little bit more towards the expansion over there. So on the 23rd, We did see some venting near the stack of CT number 1. Later on that day, we actually noticed a plume, and then 2 days later, we noticed another plume emitting from the stack of CT number 2. CT number 1 being on the left, CT number 2 being on the right. So these plumes indicate that both are actually being tested ahead of that COD, which is scheduled for June and July. Some other things to talk about, mothball units. It looks like the current generation in mothball sits just under 3 gigs. Martin Lake has already returned from mothball. We see that kind of in and out of the day ahead, running here and there. Monticello number 1 and 2 did return from mothball, although currently they are offline. Obviously, all 3 of these units are assumed to be back and ready and available come the beginning of the summer here in ERCOT, June 1. The biggest change from last year was Sam Bertrand number 1 through 4, as well as number 2 being added to mothball, which is about 765 megawatts. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ken. He's going to talk about some new and interesting rule changes.
Thanks, John. All right, so I guess we'll start off. There's a number of rule changes. Obviously, most of you have already preparing for this on June 1st, but I think the biggest one, and the one we're going to talk about the most, is the ORDC. The ORDC is also it's short for Operating Reserve Demand Curve Price Adder. And what this actually is the value, the curve that represents, 1, the value of reserves at different reserve levels based on the probability of those reserves falling below the minimum contingency, and 2, the value of lost load, or what they use in a lot of the equations, just VOLL, just shortened up. There are a number of different probabilities that are, there's a graph actually ERCOT has published, and it has different probabilities for different hours of the day and different months. A lot of it's like seasonal, get higher probabilities during higher months, during stronger months. And the other point is that the value of lost load is currently set to 9,000 megawatts. And for how it's going to work is for each SCED process, ERCOT calculates the real-time on and offline reserve price adder, and that's based on the on and offline available reserves in the ERCOT system and the ORDC. The online reserve price adder is added to the real-time LMPs to determine the real-time settlement point price. So pretty much ORDC price adder plus LMP equals real-time settlement point price. How the bare bones calculation is. And then just as for an example here, if you are a resource. Oh, okay. So if you are a resource, reserve price will be added to the LMP-based energy price that you, the resource, is paid. And if you are a load, the reserve price will be added to the LMP-based energy price that you, the load, is charged. So this all stems from a thing called the Brattle Report, which was published a few years back, I think maybe 5 years back. And here you can see a graph to the right, and the dark line actually represents gas turbine operating margins. The y-axis is dollar per kilowatt, and the x-axis is the reserve margins in percentage. And the gray dashed line to the middle is about $100 at the levelized cost of new gas turbines. And so pretty much what this report kind of showed was that the greater the reserve margin, the less opportunity there is to see scarcity pricing. With higher reserves, it's less attractive to build new turbines. And with the increased peak demand year over year, without enough new investment, reliability could really become threatened. And as you can see in the graph, the difference between the gas turbine operating margin and the levelized cost of a new gas turbine, when reserves get over 8%, they call that gap the missing money. And when they're above, there is no missing money. It's how it should operate. And they found that 8% is where they meet, and reserve margins would have to fall to about 8% to support new investments. And really what this is saying is it costs around 100 kilowatts to justify building a new resource. And if the only way a new resource could be built is if reserve margins are 8%, reliability is really threatened. And the lack of new resource investments could ultimately threaten reliability. So what we've been doing is ERCOT's been publishing this data, all the data prior to the go live on June 1st. And what you can see on this slide is real-time online reserve price adder. This kind of breaks it out. What we did is we captured about 5.5 months of data, December 1st to May 16th, but really to the present day. We just used May 16th as our cutoff date for this presentation. But so what this is actually showing here is the real-time online reserve price adder and the real-time offline reserve price adder, and actually what that value has been every hour since December 1st. We do have a couple missing days in there, but overall we have, with data points, we have 3,912 hours total. About 1,300 of those are off-peak, and about 2,600 of those are on-peak. The off-peak hours for real-time online reserves averaged only 29 cents, and while the offline price adder averaged only 2 cents. With the max off-peak price adder at $106 and the off-peak price adder at $7.88. The on-peak is obviously stronger, but right here we have on-peak, the online price average for the on-peak is only $3 and the off is only 89 cents, while the max price on-peak was $972 and the offline max price was $589.80. So what this graph is really, what this slide is really just trying to show is that of all the concern about the price adder, at least from December to May so far with this back data, over 93% of the price adders have been in a range from $0 to $1. And really, it's really just kind of driving home that the adder is really minimal at most of the time. I mean, also do take into account these were high load. I mean, these were, these weren't peak load days, peak load months, but you can see in the next couple there were some very good examples in the next couple slides I'll show you that kind of show you what happens if we hit cap and on highly volatile days. So largest adder days. On January 6th, we hit price cap for a number of hours in the morning due to, I believe it was like everything was freezing. I think there's a lot of freezing going on and a lot of tripped units, that we lost a lot of units in the morning during the ramp. And what this slide really shows you on this day, the green line, with the blue line being the lambda, so the regular price, the blue line is lambda, green line is the offline reserve adder, and the red is the online reserve adder. And what you can see for the first few hours, this happened between about 6 and 7:30. For the first few hours when there was no reserves, there was very, very little price adder, even at cap. And as we kind of moved into the more morning peak, when the units are getting ready to ramp on, that's when you actually can see that's when we still had a significant price adder attached to that. So when you have low reserves, you're going to see the price adder. When you have higher reserves, it's pretty much not even going to matter, even if you're hitting price cap. Offline price reserve adder gets built into the online price reserve adder, meaning, as you can see, the green line, which is the offline, is always below it because it's a piece of the online. It's built into that price, and you can kind of just see it here in the graph. The green line is always below the red, and the online price adder is what actually gets added to the LMP, which in turn becomes the settlement point. And then on February 10th, we had another very volatile day. And as you can see in the morning, even when prices were only $100, the reserves were very high. So there was a significant price adder there, or maybe not very high, but high in relation to the rest of the to demand that day. And you can see that there was a significant price adder in the morning. But then as we moved into the afternoon and we were seeing $1,000 pricing, there was very little price adder, and that's because we had very little reserves. So there's two example days there. I kind of just show you potentially what we could see in the summer. You know, if we have really high demand and low reserves, we're probably not going to see that much price adder. And it really is only on volatile days where we're really going to see this. And before I talk about the other rule changes, just want to kind of highlight some of the what we can expect from ORDC once it goes live next week. We expect that the dam will be more expensive, and we'll have less chances of seeing negative dart spreads. Ancillaries will also be more expensive, and greatest chance of seeing negative dart spreads will be, again, highly volatile days. Right now, we really like the first week of August. As we saw earlier, that's usually, in the last couple of years, that's been the highest demand days of the year. And, of course, just to recap one more time, just the adder will be minimal most of the time, less than $1. And what do I got? Let's see. So other rule changes. Price cap for summer 2014, as I think Brian mentioned in a slide earlier, or John, price cap for summer 2014 increases to 7,000 megawatts. That also happens on June 1st. We'll be increasing. And then there's 3 other rules that were enacted in 2012 that will be removed with the implementation of ORDC. One, responsive reserve being priced at cap. Online non-spin reserve priced at $120 a megawatt, and offline non-spin reserve priced at $180 a megawatt. And then if a unit is committed by the RUC process, all energy between the LSL and the HSL is to be priced at or above $1,000. Currently, that, if you're RUC'd on, energy between that is currently priced at price cap. And that this applies only to RUC hours, so if you continue to self-schedule your unit, you just go back to your regular curve. And so, in summary, expecting a warmer than average year, particularly in the south central and south weather zones, and especially during August. Expected to have a less active tropical storm season, which is similar to last year. Favorable wind scenario plus an overall high capacity may add more wind generation this summer. And there are more thermal CC units being added, especially those Panda units. I think that's going to be a big player this summer. Once those go live, it's going to, I think, really affect the market. And the timing of the start of these operations is key. Price cap increase $5,000 to $7,000, and the addition of ORDC could add significant price increases to the SPPs compared with last year, especially on days that will test peak demand limits and capacity becomes thin. Overall, with higher price cap and ORDC adder, day-ahead market pricing should increase significantly as well. And real-time prices should be significantly higher this summer, especially during the first few weeks of August when peak load is expected. And I think that actually wraps us up. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, if anyone would like if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the question box, and we'll hold on here for a little bit and see if we get any questions. But thank you for joining us, and yep, talk to you soon.
We do have one question so far. Can we get a copy of the presentation?
Yes, there will be copies of the presentation emailed out either today or tomorrow. So,
got another question that just came in. Will you be monitoring Panda Sherman and Panda Temple? The answer is yes, and there are a couple of options we have right now. The first is a better quality option to use our proprietary EMF monitors around the lines and the station. If that doesn't work or we can't get the easements, the other option is by IR camera. So it's definitely possible.
Oh, and then got another question. How will congestion pricing be affected by the ORDC? And ORDC will get added across the board equally, meaning like congestion is figured into the LMPs, and then the ORDC price adder is on top of it. So everything will move together. All pricing will move together. If there's an adder, it's going to be added equally across the board. All right, I think that is it. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll hear from you soon.